Welcome to dentReviews. Tonight I want to do a review of the LETSHUOER X HBB Kinda Lava, also known as the EJ07M, or just known as the Shower Kinda Lava, whatever you want to call it. So what this IM is, this is a collaboration. Basically, LETSHUOER teamed up with HBB, Bad Guy Good Audio Reviews, and he helped them to tune this to what he perceives as a more studio and reference tuning. So, what is this thing? Well, it's a high-profile 7-driver tribrid IEM. Tribrid meaning there's 3 different types of drivers in this thing. It's pretty crazy. They have 4 Sonion EST drivers in this thing. They have 2 balanced armatures by Sonion and 1 10mm carbon nanotube dynamic driver in each of these earpieces. So you have 7 drivers in each of these bad boys. That's crazy. It kind of reminds me of Van Halen. I wish they would make a Van Halen edition. That would be really cool to have this faceplate be Van Halen. That'd be awesome. The cable that it comes with is pretty nice. It's a fairly tightly woven braid. Braids all the way down to the bottom. I've seen this in a couple different earphones where it's sort of this slight rubber strain relief. It's nothing amazing, but it's probably okay. I really like the small 3.5mm barrel. This is the 4-pin for a balanced 4mm, 4.4mm balance connector. So I actually have the Kato 3.5mm that I can swap onto this to use it with my standard players. It has a nice, fairly tight cord cinch on the cord. You can see it doesn't really move very easily. You have to kind of pull it pretty good. It has a nice small centerpiece, which I like a lot. Excuse me. It has nice barrels that go into the 2-pin connector. The connectors aren't too tight. They're not too loose. One feature I do like compared to Moondrop and some other companies is there's a red and a blue indicator on the 2-pin barrel here. That makes it incredibly easy to know which one is the left and right channel when you're trying to connect the cable. Sometimes you might want to swap between balanced and 3.5. So, unbalanced, you can just pop this off and put it back, and you know the color to get which ear is right very quickly. So that's basically the build. It's made of a metal, and it feels like it's aluminum, I think. Some kind of alloy. It's very lightweight. It's a metal and it's lightweight, so I'm guessing aluminum. It is very smooth. It's not a very strong custom shape, but like a lot of the earphones nowadays, it has sort of a general, kind of custom ear curvature to it, make it fit in your ear nice and stable. For me personally, it's very ergonomic. It does fit well in my ear and it's pretty stable, so I'm happy with that. So that's the design. I'm just going to jump right into the sound here. I'm going to pull up a graph here on my website, dent.reviews. Please go there if you want to check this out in real time and kind of compare it to other earphones. But what you'll find here on my graph is if you click on the Dent Reviews target under the Reviewer Target section, this is my preferred target. This is in my personal and somewhat professional experience as an engineer in studios with reference monitors, different things. This is kind of what I perceive to be closest to a studio monitor neutrality in an earphone. My target is not perfect. It's kind of, been adapting to the things that I've heard with newer IEMs that come out, and I've tweaked it a little bit, but I'd say this is probably at 95 to 98% where I think it should be. So it's pretty close. If I could get an earphone that matched this target, I'd be incredibly happy. Now, as you can see, the actual Kinda Lava, matches my target pretty darn well. So if you look at the bass, the sub bass is right where it needs to be. There's a little bit extra bass at the 100 to 200 hertz region. I'm talking minor, but there's a little bit. It doesn't have that same shape that I put in there. But up to about 2 kilohertz is pretty neutral. And then everything above 2 kilohertz is very neutral on average, but you'll see that it kind of fluctuates up and down with little ripples. Now, just to kind of jump into the sound real quick. The tonality, again, as you can see from the graph, according to my opinion, is very neutral. The overall balance between bass, mids, and treble, very, very neutral. The sense of weight in the notes is very accurate, meaning compared to a speaker, you're not ever going to have that same exact impression with an earphone, but I think it comes close to having kind of a natural sound to the thickness of a note and how things attack in the sort of realistic weight to the sound. If you look, let's just start with the bass. One of the best bass responses I've heard in an earphone, bar none. I think it's a phenomenal bass response. The curve is excellent. While I do prefer just ever so slightly less of that 1 to 200 hertz region, I think it's still phenomenal. What that does, if you were to cut that region just another 1.5, 2 decibels, it really just brings out a little bit more of the really low impact and clarity to the bass without really making it sound thin at all, because it's just isolated to that one region. There's a lot of build-up there with instrumentation, so even a slight increase in that 150 hertz area, let's say, can result in things kind of blending together a little bit. So having that at that perfect spot that I consider neutral, to my ears, opens the bass space up, so things sound tight and impactful and bassy when needed, not bassy when not needed. So it's incredibly close there, but it's not perfect. Going up into the mids, this has gorgeous mids. They're very, very smooth, very, very clean, all the way up to 2 kilohertz, which I consider upper mids, lower treble. After that is where I think a lot of the trouble is for me. On the one hand, the response is phenomenal. Now, I have to say this, take these measurements with a grain of salt. I use a pretty well-calibrated microphone. The coupler I have has a calibration file that I got from the company, and I've used that calibration file. So it's decent for its price. It's not the highest end coupler in the world. It's it's a knockoff coupler, but it's the IE711 whatever coupler. And what I'm trying to get at though is that everything above 10 kilohertz is fairly known to be hit or miss. I can't guarantee that the accuracy above that region is going to be representative of what the earphones actually do. In my experience, and from what I've heard, it does seem to match my ears. The frequency response spikes and dips of earphones that I measure at that height, at that range, generally does match what I hear. So I consider this a fairly accurate measurement tool. So looking at this measurement, you can see everything above 2 kilohertz is incredibly neutral on average, with just that up and down dips here and there. Now what I will say is this. Comparing it to something like the Moondrop Kato, which is a little bit smoother up until about the 9 to 10 kilohertz region, that slight smoothness is audible to me. However, it's a very difficult thing to know if that's because of the armature, whereas the Lava is a balanced armature and an EST combination, and the Kato is a dynamic driver. I've also recently been listening to the Thigh Audio Elixir, which is very similar in response to the Kato, especially in that mid-treble, lower treble region, that also shares a similar quality to the Kato, which the Lava does not have. So I can't guarantee that the Lava is exhibiting this character that I'm about to describe because of the response itself, or maybe because of the driver tech, or maybe a combination of both. So what do I hear? Well, I hear that the overall response is phenomenal. It's incredibly linear treble, clear, precise. It has a lot of air. It has a lot of clarity. It doesn't have any sharp peaks. It doesn't have any sibilants. It just sounds like a very neutral treble. However, the Kato and the Elixir both sound a little bit smoother in that mid-treble range between 2 to 10 kilohertz. They both sound more liquidy clear, kind of a cool, almost edemotic-like, silky smooth response. And I can hear the metallic timbre, the texture of metallic instruments like drums, cymbals, and things like that are very, very natural. Piano strings, when you strike high notes on the piano, very natural. On the Lava, that response is very natural, but it just has ever so slightly more of a dry quality to it and less of a silky smooth quality. Now, relative to most earphones that I've heard, the Lava is phenomenally smooth. It's incredibly clean. It is one of the best responses I've ever heard. But compared to a single dynamic, or maybe even a planar, I'd have to compare them a little bit more in depth, but they just sound a little drier. And I'm not sure if that's that treble up and down kind of waviness. Even though it's slight, it just takes away from that absolute clarity. Because when you have something like, let's look at the 5 kilohertz, it's ever so slightly above my target, and then 6 kilohertz is below, and then 7 kilohertz is above. So that area in that 6 kilohertz range is going to be masked ever so slightly by the 4 and 6 kilohertz range around it, or 5 and 7, whatever. The dip is going to be masked by those relative bumps that are next to it. So I feel like that could be taking away a little bit of that kind of cool silk quality that you would hear with an Etymotic or a Kato that is more flat and linear in that response area. But again, it could be the balanced armature and the EST driver tech just giving a different kind of timbre, different textural quality. I'm not sure. I would honestly think that it's probably a combination of both. In my experience, I've heard balanced armature drivers and dynamic drivers compared extensively, and I've always preferred dynamic drivers for that metallic accuracy. I say metallic because that's the number one thing that stands out to me normally. When I'm listening to music and I hear something that clanks, I go listen to the intro to Silly Love Songs by Paul McCartney. And the metallic noises, every little one from the clank, chink, to the little like rippley metal, they all sound absolutely clear and realistic. On the lava, they do sound similarly realistic and clear, but with a difference in the texture. They sound drier and less metallic. I don't know how to describe it other than it's slight, but it's just not as clear sounding to me, not as smooth. This is minor in its comparison to most earphones, but compared to earphones that are similar, like the Kato and the Elixir, I prefer those for the treble sound, the treble character, even though I probably would argue that I prefer the Lavo's actual response. So, overall, excellent response. I don't want to get too into the treble. So it has a slightly drier texture. It has a very nice imaging position. Instruments are very precise as to where they sound like they should be in the sound field. If the guitar is panned right, you can kind of almost reach your hand out and grab where the guitar would be. It's not, I hate the word holographic. I don't like audiophile terms that don't really have any clear description. But the idea of something being holographic to me would be the idea that it really sounds like it's in a physical space in front of you. Like you almost think the guy standing there that's playing the guitar. That to me is what holographic would mean. These aren't exactly holographic per se, but they are very natural, and things do have a very specific and distinct placement in the stereo field, and there is a depth, kind of a forward and backward depth to it. So, in terms of technical performance, technicalities if you want to call it that, I would say these are very, very good. In general, I'd say for a tribrid, a multi-driver tech earphone, this is probably in the top few I've ever heard. It's phenomenal. It's very good sound quality, very dark, clean background. There's really nothing objectionable about it, but compared to something like the Kato or the Elixir, just even though they may not have the exact smooth frequency response overall, like on average, the treble response of those is just hits my ears a little bit nicer than these. These come off sounding slightly relaxed while still being clear and bright and airy. They sound a little bit more relaxed in a way. And I actually like that dynamic driver energy, that firm tactile sensation that you have across the spectrum, but most clearly in the treble. So, how much do these things cost? Well, on average, they seem to go around $600. You can get them for $669 new, that's retail. On their sale right now is $602.10, so $602. And then you also can get a 10% discount off of that, which brings it down to $540 or something around that. But they seem to float around that $600 mark. How does that stand in terms of value? Well, personally, I would rate these as, again, one of the nicest responses I've ever heard. Even though I'm not a fan of the timbre and the texture of a EST balanced armature tribrid versus a dynamic, I do think these are still some of the best I've heard in that regard. The response makes up for a lot of that textural difference that most balanced armatures I've heard exhibit. So how would this compare to something that's a lot cheaper, like maybe the EST 112? That's a little bit more laid back even than this. It's been a while since I've heard the EST 112, but I think that is a phenomenal value and excellent earphone. I would say this is superior in frequency response, and I'd probably prefer it overall to that. But it's also more expensive. How would it compare to the Kato? Well, I'd say I prefer the Kato compared to this. In a back-to-back comparison, I think the Kato just exhibits a more natural texture, more realistic quality to it. even though the frequency response to this is probably ever so slightly more what I consider neutral. But the Kato is significantly cheaper. It's like a third the price. So, well, what does that all mean? I think that for the price, if you were to get this on sale for $540, this is still an excellent value. Some people might balk at that and say, that's a lot of money. There's $20 earphones that are phenomenal. And I'm actually one of those people. I think the Moondrop Chew is an unbelievable value at $20 to $30. And the Elixir and the Kato are only a few $100s, and they're, in my opinion, better than this in some ways that matter the most to me. However, the design of this is well made. It seems durable, is comfortable, has a nice cable. The frequency response is really second to none. It's a phenomenal frequency response. Other than that, if you don't mind the sound of a balanced armature or a tribrid in terms of the coherency, the texture, just the way it sounds compared to a single dynamic driver, for instance, or even a single balanced armature like an Etymotic, if you don't find any fault in that, then these might just be one of the best you're going to get in terms of neutrality, according to my preference. So if you agree with that preference and you kind of look at the graphs and maybe compare it to other earphones that you've heard and how they compare to my graph, you can play with EQ a little bit. You might kind of get a sense of whether you think that Target is good or not. This matches that, probably the closest of what I've seen and heard. So I think value-wise, the tuning alone, I'd say is worth the price. It's an excellent tuning. And I actually do enjoy the relaxed quality of these. I just think that that extra natural timbre in the dynamic drivers that I like wins me over just a little bit more and makes me want to stick with those. But I would be absolutely, I'd enjoy these if I own these. I would have no problem as my main driver. These are phenomenal sound quality, phenomenal performance, excellent frequency response. Yes, they're a little bit expensive, but I do think they're probably worth the value. There's such competition nowadays in this kind of $100 to $500 price range that there are some incredibly competent competitors to this. I think the biggest thing they have going for them is simply that frequency response. If you want to hear what I consider neutral, this is it, with those caveats that I mentioned. So that is the LETSHUOER kind of lava, and honestly, I kind of love it. It's nice. So thank you guys for watching. As always, if you have any questions, just please leave them below, and I'll try to get to them as fast as I can.